Now that it's springtime, kids are getting outside more often. They're becoming more active, and one of the pieces of equipment that I find that kids most often like to use is the trampoline. And that's a question that a lot of parents, when they come into the office, they ask me, is it safe for my child to be jumping on a trampoline? Is it good for their back, or is it bad for their back? And one of the things I want you to understand is that there's nothing inherently wrong with your child jumping on a trampoline as long as they have a healthy spine to begin with. And you know, a trampoline can be a great form of exercise, cardiovascular exercise. It's good for their core strength, the muscles that support their spine, and good for their balance. So from that standpoint, trampolines are great, but you do have to understand that jumping on a trampoline does put a lot more stress on the joints of the body, on the knees and the hips and the spine itself. There's much more of a compressive load as the vertebrae and the discs are under more compressive stress when you're jumping on the trampoline. So you want to make sure that that there are some conditions that you want to be careful of if you're considering jumping on the trampoline. You want to make sure that you don't have a history of recent back pain, of sciatica or pinched nerves or degenerating discs, that type of thing. And those aren't typically conditions that you see in a child. The things that you want to be more aware of with your child are things like if they've got a history of muscle tension, if your child does have a history of back pain, perhaps they've just got really poor posture that you've noticed. And these things can make your child more vulnerable to injury if they're jumping. So you want to make sure that if you're suspecting any of these things, that you get your child checked by a chiropractor before they become active on a trampoline, because those are typically the kids that I see that come into the office with injuries related to jumping on the trampoline. So presuming that your child has a healthy spine, that they've been checked and there's no problems, like I say, as long as you follow some basic safety rules, then you know, kids have my blessing to jump on a trampoline. And those safety rules are the things that you're probably familiar with, things like only one person jumping on the trampoline at a time. And that doesn't just have to do with collisions with kids running into each other, but it also has to do with the different forces that are put through the spine. There's something called a rebound effect. When one child is landing as the other is taking off, it can put kind of a whiplash force through the spine, and it can make the spine, particularly the neck area, more vulnerable to injury. So when you have those abrupt or unexpected forces, which are more likely to happen when two jumpers are happening at the same time, you want to avoid that as much as possible. The second thing is obviously you have to have a good enclosure around your trampoline, because most injuries happen when kids fall off of trampolines. That's when you get the concussions, the head injuries, the neck injuries, the fractures, the more serious injuries that are associated with a trampoline. So make sure that you've got a good enclosure, and as a parent you want to make sure that you inspect it periodically to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. As far as technique goes, you want to encourage your child to bend their knees to absorb the impact when they're coming down, and not to lock their knees out, because that tends to put a lot more force through the spine as well. And fourth and finally, I would just say encourage your child not to do anything that they're unfamiliar with. If they're trying to do any flips with twists, anything that they're not really trained by, you know, a gymnastics studio to do, you don't want them to be doing anything like that. Only moves that they're familiar with, where they're not going to be more likely to land awkwardly. I jump on the trampoline with my kids. I love to do it, and same rules apply. You're a little bit more likely to get injured the older that you get, because your discs tend to dry out more as you get older. They're about 80 to 90% water when you're a kid, about 60 to 70% when you're older. So if you've got any history of back pain as an adult, make sure that you get checked out before you jump on the trampoline. And I hope you have a great time jumping, and be safe. And I hope you found this really helpful. If you know anybody that has a trampoline and they're concerned about trampoline safety, please feel free to share this with them. Thanks so much for listening.